Podcast Digest, the first one of the new year 2016. This is episode 73, and thank you guys for being patient with me on my 1 week off. I didn't say it up front, but everybody should know it by now. My name's Dan Lizette, host of the Podcast Digest. This is the show that you come to if you are just now joining me for the first time, to find out behind-the-scenes information of your favorite shows and also to find new things for your subscription list in this ever-growing podcasting world. That's what I'm here to do. That's what I try to bring you guys each and every week. And I'm done taking weeks off. I promise. 2016, I'm going to try to pick up where I left off in 2015 and bring you more great conversations and more great shows that I personally feel you guys should be checking out. So let's get right to it this week. My guest, as you guys have probably seen from the episode title, is Allison Behringer with The Intern from Betaworks. This is a brand new podcast that is sort of similar to a vein of a couple of other shows that I've featured on the Podcast Digest in the past. I think probably most similar would maybe Megan Tan from Millennial or Tally Abacassis from First Day Back. It's sort of what I would consider maybe a documentary style podcast, but it's a really interesting new show, and I love the direction that it's taking. And I wanted to get a chance to talk to Allison right off the bat and have you guys jump on the bandwagon early and take this ride with her. So without further ado, Allison, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks so much, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me, and I know that we tried to do this a little bit earlier, and much to my chagrin, I had a power outage situation, so thank you for being flexible this week and putting this together so that I didn't have to tell people I'd miss another week. But so for anybody who's not familiar with you or your show, let's talk a little bit about yourself and your background and your road to joining the podcasting world.
Yeah, sure. Which direction are we going first?
Just a little bit about you. Tell folks about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I came to podcasting recently. I did not study podcasting. I was a sociology major and graduated from college in 2012. And then I went to Thailand and taught English for a year, which was amazing and just a really beautiful, wonderful year, and loved that. But in the end, decided to come back to the States and then taught for a year in the Bronx. I was teaching 10th grade. So I was teaching English in both Thailand and the Bronx, but it couldn't have been a more different experience. Both very great. And then I got to the end of the year and felt like, okay, teaching is a profession that I love. It's rewarding. It's challenging. I could do this and be happy, but I also felt like there was other things that I wanted to explore. I wanted to explore journalism and writing. I'd also, during my time teaching, been working with some friends from school on a women's health nonprofit called Passand. And so I wanted to try that out. And so during this spring of my year teaching in the Bronx, I applied to the SALT Institute, which some listeners might be familiar with. Unfortunately, it closed down recently, but it's this great documentary studies program. So I got into SALT and knew I'd be going there in the fall. And then over the summer, so summer of 2014, I was like, all right, have this time. I'm done teaching. I will be going to SALT in the fall. So I had a few months over the summer. So then took those couple months and went to India to launch this nonprofit that my friends and I had been working on. And it had really been just an idea for 2 years since we graduated. And the idea is we partner with schools and deliver a women's health teaching curriculum. And the focus is on puberty, menstruation, sexual assault prevention. So went over to India for a few months, got that kicked off, and my friend and colleague Anna is still over there. So that's like a huge passion of mine. And then went to SALT and loved that. So I guess what I've found in my short post-college career is like I keep trying new things, hoping that I'll find like the thing that I really love. And what I keep finding is that like I just love all the new things that I keep trying. And when I finished with SALT, I came to the city thinking like I'm going to get into writing or documentary film. And like, to be honest, really struggled the first couple months that I was here and, you know, did some one-off production gigs, was working an office job part-time. and it was hard. And like anyone who has done something similar, it kind of sucks and you start doubting yourself. And then, as if you listen to the first episode, you'll hear the story. But essentially, I got this email from a Michael May, who was a radio instructor at SALT, and said, like, hey, is anyone recently moved to the city and is looking for something to do? If so, get in touch. Interesting opportunity awaits. And I was like, I just moved to the city. I'm looking for something to do. Hands raised right here. Pick me. And at that point, I got in touch with Betaworks. And this guy named James Cooper is my now boss, and he's the creative director at Betaworks. Betaworks is a tech company. They have built companies like TweetDeck, Bitly, Giphy. They have all these tech products that they've built. And then they also do seed stage investing. And the connection to podcasting and audio is that they've become really interested in podcasts. They were an early investor in Gimlet, for example, and are really interested in this exploding field or exploding industry. And so James was like, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be fun if we just brought in some young person to make a podcast about what it's like to intern at a tech company, intern at Betaworks? And it would follow this character, this person, as they're going through their life in New York City as an intern, with not a lot of money, trying to make sense of the world. And so I came in, had a chat with James, and put together he asked me to put together a sample of, what I could do. And then was kind of like on contract. It was like, and I say in the first episode, it was very confusing. I didn't really know if I was going to get this job. And, eventually got it in writing as my grandfather instructed me to do. And that's what brought me to my internship at Betaworks and the podcast.
So this is
a very long answer to your question.
No, it's great. It definitely paints a picture of a very wide, varied, almost eclectic background at this point. You definitely have interests in a lot of disparate fields and areas. This is probably an unfair question, but so far in your experience in podcasting at Betaworks, how does that compare and contrast to these international experiences, dealing with young people, these educational endeavors? How in terms of sort of satisfaction or what you're getting out of it, how do they compare or contrast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, it's something that I touch on it in the first episode. And it's something I think about a lot, with teaching, for example, I think, to be honest, the first half of both school years, I was probably doing more harm than good because I was the first teacher. But, there are these moments where you're like, wow, I'm connecting with another human. I'm part of this effort to make schools better. It's right there. And you feel like, hey, I'm working really hard and something good is happening. One student maybe is being affected in a positive way. And I don't get that every day at Betaworks. So that's not there. What is there working at Betaworks, and which has been so cool, is that every person that I talk to has, super smart. They've done really interesting things. I feel like I am learning at such a high rate. I'm constantly challenged, and I've been challenged in other ways, but it's just totally plopped down in a new world. And I guess what's been cool about Betaworks is I have never been in an environment where I'm constantly surrounded by so many smart but also humble, thoughtful people. It's just well, I guess college, but maybe we all kind of miss that experience. But just lots of energy, lots of smart people. Every lunchtime conversation, I feel like I'm learning something new. So yeah, it's hard to compare, and they're different. But yeah, it's been a really great experience so far.
Would you consider yourself a risk taker or sort of a thrill junkie, so to speak? Because it seems like you have really gotten into things. I don't imagine many people came out of college and went to teach in Thailand, or who have been a part of launching, their own charitable or educational organization, or you're almost as a test bunny, if you will, in this pilot project of a intern in New York for a tech company. It seems like these are almost like all firsts or very small exclusive clubs. And it's almost like you get presented with these ideas and you're like, yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, is that sort of a thing for you?
Yeah. I mean, when I think of like risk taker, I think of like someone skydiving or something. But I guess, I mean,
professional risk taker, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I do. I love, trying to figure out new situations. Part of it is, to be honest, I didn't think in college, like, I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to do this. So I think it's partially because I don't really know what I want to do. So I'm trying to figure it out. But I love trying new things. I think my mom would definitely say I'm a risk taker. She also doesn't really approve of me riding my bike around in New York City every day.
Right. When you send her the crime statistics and you say, Mom, look, it's lowest crime rate in all these years, it's fine.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, it's I mean, it sounds like we could have like 18 different podcast episodes just about each of these chapters in your brief kind of professional experience already. I mean, just one more question on the background here. Coming out of school, I imagine a lot of people come out of school and would like to be teachers, and bless their hearts, this country wouldn't be what it is without the wonderful teachers we've got around. But how did that teaching end up in Thailand? Like, how does that decision process, how do you even apply for a teaching job in Thailand?
So my, in college, I was really fortunate to do 2 internships abroad. So after my sophomore year, I did an internship in India, which really sparked the interest in India and in women's health. And then the following summer, I worked at a school in South Africa. And so going into my senior year, I mean, a lot of my classmates, had, after their internships after junior year, like had their finance jobs, had their consulting jobs. And to me, I was like, I want to go live in another country for a whole year. And so I went to Princeton, and there's this really great program called Princeton in Asia. So Princeton in Asia is not part of the university, but it's affiliated. And they've been sending recent graduates over to Asia since like before the turn of the century, like sending people over to China in boats, and you would get on this boat and go to China to teach, and you didn't talk to your family. But today it's become, they send probably 200 or so recent graduates over to Asia every year. And it's not just Princeton students, it's anyone can apply. And so there's NGO posts, there's teaching posts, there's journalism posts, all the way from like Kazakhstan down to Singapore. And so I was like, oh, I think this is it. Like, this is exactly what I want to do. And I remember going into the Princeton Asia office and meeting with this woman, Marisa, and she's like, where in Asia do you want to go? I was like, I don't know. She's like, all right. Hot. And there's this big map on the wall of Asia. And she said, okay, hot or cold?
I was going to say, it starts with the weather, doesn't it?
I said, hot. And so she puts her hand over the northern part of Asia. She's like, okay, do you speak Chinese? I said, no. And she put her hand over China. And then she said, do you like Japan? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, okay, never mind. Some people just really love Japan. So then she put her hand over Japan. And she's like, what about teaching? It's like, yeah. She's like, how about Thailand? Like, okay, that sounds great. And that's how I ended up in Thailand.
That's so much better than the internet. I mean, in terms of narrowing a decision, right? You just need somebody to cover up pieces of a map, and you can get there in like 30 seconds, Googling up all the countries. And
Yeah, totally.
That's a great story. Oh, that explains it.
Yeah.
That explains how you ended up there. All right. So you come back to New York. You do the year teaching in New York, and then you end up into, you called it SALT for the, you said that was for journalism and film?
It's the SALT Institute for Documentary Studies, and it's similar to Transom. I don't know if have you heard of Transom? So it's similar to Transom, different in that they have radio, but they also have photography, writing, and then a multimedia component. So I actually went to SALT for writing and multimedia. I was not in the radio track, but certainly like picked up the radio vibes and learned, I think, what I know about editing and story structure, the multimedia stuff.
So coming out of there, you were originally hopeful for more documentary film efforts.
Yeah. And I mean, I didn't know. I was like, I think I want to write. When I got to the city, I worked on a documentary about hormonal birth control, which is like super up my alley with women's health. But was working for free, working a couple days a week for free. And at some point, the woman who I was working for, the funding ran out, and she was like, okay, well, this project's on pause. All right. And so, then I'm starting thinking like, all right, what did I do here? I quit this profession that is stable. I knew I loved it. I was going in a direction. And now I'm here with no job. And, jobs that aren't going to pay me. I really lucked out with this internship. But I think you hear it's interesting because so many, I networked a bunch. I tried to meet people. I met a ton of people. People are very, very generous with their time, repeatedly going out of their way to help me, connect with people. But the advice that everyone gave, or when I would ask like, oh, how'd you get to this job? They'd say like, oh, I was at my uncle's birthday party and I met his cousin who, like everyone has a story like that. But it's frustrating when you're not in yet and everyone keeps telling you like, yeah, just keep talking to people, like keep talking to people. That's how you'll get your job. And it's like, no, but I'm talking to you. Like, why can't you help me get this job? So I guess now that I'm more like on the inside for the time being, like I have a job. It's like, yeah, I guess like eventually all that talking to people, researching things, sending cold emails, that stuff paid off eventually. So yeah.
Yeah, because being at a place or being at a job where you're working for free in one of the most expensive cities in the country probably isn't too sustainable, I imagine.
No, it is not.
There's definitely a time clock on that enterprise.
Yeah. And I had some savings.
I like how you say had. I like how you say had.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is past tense. Yes. The savings are very past tense. Yeah, and like working kind of a not crappy, but just like not the job I wanted to be doing, right. Office job.
So the Betaworks opportunity comes your way, and then you join up, and you go through these great conversations, and I really hope. For what it's worth, as listener feedback, I'm going to give it to you now. I really hope your grandfather appears in more episodes.
You're going with that.
Because he's awesome. And folks, check the show notes. As always, links over to the intern will be in there, and you'll know quickly exactly what I'm talking about. You need to hear Grandpa on the intern. And so eventually you join in, and as you're beginning, as sort of your first week or two that are there, there's got to be a sense of overwhelming.
Oh my gosh, totally. This, I don't think it's not a spoiler at all. I'm going to talk about in the next episode, but I literally had this notebook, and on one page I kept like writing down the names of all the people that I was meeting, and I don't know, some detail that they would tell me and what company they worked for. And then I had another page where I would just write down all these phrases and acronyms and abbreviations and words I didn't know. But yeah, it was so overwhelming also because as I think is the Betaworks way, as is the startup way, people are not going to tell you what to do. And I to be honest, that first week I was kind of waiting for someone to tell me what to do, and no one did. And yeah, it was definitely overwhelming those first couple weeks. I still find myself sometimes in conversations like, I don't know what people are talking about. I don't know what I'm doing. That feeling has not gone away completely, for sure.
So to the extent that you can at this point, and let's talk a little bit about Betaworks, because I was actually a little bit familiar. You mentioned how real big podcast fans of Gimlet, fans of the, I believe, first season of Startup, will be familiar with the group Betaworks, because I believe they're mentioned in a couple of episodes, at least one, if I recall. I was also familiar with Betaworks because they became the new home of an app I used to use way back when, Marco Arment's old Instapaper. So yep. I'd actually heard of Betaworks even prior to the Gimlet Media, so I have a little bit of familiarity. But for folks who have no idea what this is sort of a collection of companies sort of focusing on startups. Can you tell folks just generally a little bit about Betaworks?
Yeah. So I had this, I interviewed our head of our financial guy, and I was asking him about Betaworks. Like, can you explain the structure to me? And he said, he's like, Betaworks is hard to understand, even for people who get it. It's still, a little confusing because there's no, I think a lot of startup incubators, they have this hard and fast rule that they like apply to all the companies that they bring in. Betaworks considers itself a startup studio. And Betaworks does three things. One, they build companies from the ground up. So they hire smart people, they hire developers, they hire creative people, and they just kind of say like, here's the time, here's the resources, here's the space, like build something cool. They also will bring on very early stage companies kind of like into the Betaworks fold. So that was with Instapaper. I believe that it was a kind of a similar scenario. Like Marco had this great thing and he was like, here, Betaworks, like they made a deal now. Instapaper is under Betaworks. And then, so some examples of companies that are part of Betaworks that listeners might be familiar with, but they don't know is part of Betaworks. Dots, the mobile game, is Betaworks.
Love it.
Yeah. I got really obsessed with Dots and then had to delete it off my phone because it's addictive.
I do love Dots. My kids love Dots too. We've all gotten into Dots.
Yeah. So Dots is one. Dig.com. Betaworks kind of revived that. So dig.com is totally new and different than people who used it maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Bitly, TweetDeck, these are all Betaworks companies. And then Betaworks also makes seed stage investments in companies. So that means like when it's just two people and an idea, Betaworks will give a small amount of money to those people to build their company up. So that Betaworks was an early investor in Twitter, for example.
Yeah, and some of the names you were running down there, folks. Anyone who follows me on Twitter at Pod Digest knows that just about every link I send to a show is a Bitly link. So I'm also familiar with Bitly very much so, which is one of the reasons why, as I started to listen to The Intern, and I think I came across it as a featured show on Pocket Casts, which is my podcast app of choice, came across there, saw the interesting artwork, and I said, ooh, and I want to ask you about that in just a minute. Subscribed, listened to a couple episodes, then went to the website and say, oh, I do this, I have that, I love this. I'm like, this is great. So yes, I'm like you said, folks may be much more familiar with several of the Betaworks family of products and companies than they may realize.
Yeah.
So when you were brought on, and you mentioned it briefly, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more, sort of like, what are your days at this point? Like, sort of what is it are you exclusively a podcast producer, or do you have other roles and responsibility within the company and you're documenting those through the podcast? How does this all set up?
Yeah. So I, especially when I first started, was just recording everything. Because when you don't understand anything, you don't know what's interesting yet. So I was recording everything. I was recording conversations at home with roommates, like any interaction I was having, I was recording. And I talk about this a little bit in the second episode, but really I felt like, you know what, I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn about people and what they're doing. So I spent a lot of time just doing that, asking people about their what they were working on. And the way you do that at Betaworks is by hanging out in the snack area, because people come over and want to chit chat. So I talk to people a lot. I also started working on the newsletter that Betaworks sends out every week. It's called Open Beta. So I started writing that. I started doing the Instagram account, got pulled onto some projects here and there. And, you know, from like a career standpoint, my mentality has been like, all right, I'm just going to try everything and do as much as I can and really like take advantage of this internship experience. And so, yeah, there's no like real routine to my days. It depends on if there's someone interesting in the office to talk to. And it depends on like the stage of production that I'm in.
Sort of peeling back the curtain, if you will, and
Yeah.
giving people an idea of sort of some of these wonderful people you were describing earlier and what goes to make up some of the great work that Betaworks is doing. So the idea is going to be your sort of familiarizing yourself process, if you will, with all of that, and it's going to end up turning itself into podcast episodes.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I see what you're saying. Right, and so the whole idea is that there is really so much cool stuff going on, and I consider myself, right, like, I'm very much an outsider to the tech space, to Betaworks. I'm totally an outsider, but I have this unique position of insider access. So I'm bringing the listener along with me as I discover all this cool stuff going on, and like as I ask some of the questions. So in episode 2, I asked the question, like, where the heck is all this money coming from?
Right.
Like, I don't think any of these companies are making money. How is it that there's happy hours every Thursday and there's like unlimited almond butter? Like, I just can't wrap my head around it. And also, I think that when you're in a new situation or a new job or career, you tend to think that the questions that you have are like dumb, or, everyone knows this.
Right.
And I'm really in a cool position because my job is to ask those questions, and I get to ask those questions, like, to our head of finance at Betaworks. And I think that also, I bring, to be honest, a little bit of skepticism. I come from the nonprofit world and education. And so I think I do approach a lot of these things that maybe people in the tech world take for granted or just as the status quo. I have questions. I have some serious questions about them. And in an upcoming episode, I'm going to kind of dive into Twitter. I mean, I was not a Twitter user before I started working here. So, like, what's the deal with that? Like, why is everyone so into Twitter? And hopefully the listeners will, one, like, be able to relate to, having a new job or being in a new industry. And then also, secondly, like, learn something about the tech industry, and maybe like get some tips on how to use Twitter and stuff like that.
It's almost like I've been thinking as you've been describing it, you're almost like an embedded reporter, so to speak, for Betaworks, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the production process. You mentioned a minute ago, similar to some of the other ones I talked about with Megan Tan and Tally Abacassis, what I call more documentary style podcasts, that you are constantly recording pretty much. I imagine you use a portable recorder?
Yeah, I have a portable recorder that's like a very small microphone that I take around with me, and then I have a more like industry standard setup that I use for sit down interviews.
And you're recording on average how much a day?
It totally depends. If I'm doing something exciting or like talking to a lot of people, it could be a couple hours. Some days I don't record anything. So it really all depends.
So you've gathered up all the audio.
Yeah.
And then what happens? What's the process of creating an episode of The Intern?
Yeah, so I have this Google Doc where I log all my tapes. So I note the file name, where the date, who I spoke with, what our topic of conversation, where we were, and then like kind of do a little bit of transcribing. And then prior to the release of the first episode, I kind of sat down and I had a ton of sticky notes, and I was kind of going through this Excel spreadsheet and picking out what I thought was important, putting it on sticky notes. And I just kind of had like 2 tables covered with sticky notes, and the sticky notes had stories. They had ideas, topics, like interesting sound. And from there, I tried to think about like, you know, again, going back to what I was saying before, like what are some questions that I have about the tech industry? What do I want answered as like me, Allison? And then trying to figure out what experiences I had documented fit in with those questions and fit in with those themes. But you know, what's been interesting, I did that like first pass through the tape, and now, you know, going back, and now that I have, you know, a clearer sense of what I want to explore more, I'm going back to the tape and I'm like, oh, wait, that's relevant. That's relevant. So it's constantly like trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together. So I would say a lot of sticky notes and a lot of color coding on an Excel spreadsheet. And then kind of once I have the pieces of tape that I think are important, I'll start writing. So, you know, for example, like with this first episode, I wasn't recording the narration, you know, as I was going along. That's something that happened later. But what I've been doing is keeping a journal, and recording a lot, and in writing my narration and in writing about like those feelings of the first day, I've been able to refer back to this journal and really like get myself into like Allison day 1 Betaworks. How did it feel? And then I kind of have a script, and I'm really, really fortunate to work with Caitlin Prest. She hosts and produced The Heart. And I met her just randomly. New York City has this radio club, and every month we meet. And I went to my first one, and I knew I needed an editor. I knew I couldn't do this by myself. I needed someone who knew what they were talking about. And just to be able to say like, oh, this is interesting. That's interesting. It's kind of hard to do that when all of the tape is like your own experience and you're connected to it. And so she's been like enormously helpful, in helping me figure out, like, she was right there with all the sticky notes, telling me like, oh no, this is interesting. This thing, Allison, that you don't think is important is actually really important. So she's been like, I could not have be doing this without her. So we meet a few hours a week, and she's really instrumental in a lot of like the big picture, thematic structuring. And I mean, like also down to the sound editing and the sound engineering.
Yeah, that's a great show, by the way, folks. The Heart, one of the few Radiotopia shows I've not yet featured on the Podcast Digest. And The Heart is awesome. Been a subscriber for a long time, and I think all of Radiotopia does great work. But The Heart is a unique show.
It is,
that's for sure. There's nothing else out there along the lines of The Heart, and it's another great recommendation there. So that's really neat that you've got sort of the experience, on call, if you will, to kind of guide you through this process.
Yeah, and also The Heart. I mean, it's so earnest and and honest, and it's very confessional in style, which I think that I hope people kind of get that similar feeling from the intern. And that's what, my goal is for it to feel like that, honest and truthful and personal. Yeah.
So what has the reception been like around the office? So all these people, part of these companies, are just going about their business at first, and then all of a sudden this new intern joins and she's walking around recording everything. Has everybody been really receptive to what you're putting together?
Yeah, people have been really receptive. It's like, everyone has those jokes that people say to them, and you're like, haha, I know, I've heard that a million times. It's like so many times people be like, Allison, are you recording?
You've got a reputation of recording everything now.
Right, yeah. right. Or I'll be like out with friends or out with coworkers in a situation where I would just not be recording. And they're like, are you recording this? So it was, and a lot of people that I talked to, they were right. I was telling them about the process. They were right along with me, helping with the launch. There was like a small team. There has been a small team at the office who, did the artwork, did the website, all that. But then there's also some people who I just don't talk to as much. And I was just like the girl running around with the microphone who are there, like, who is this person? What are they doing? And then all of a sudden they're like, when the first episode came out, they're like, oh, so this is what you've been doing. I get it now.
Now we know why you've been walking around with a recorder for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So outside of the office, that was the next question. How do friends and family take it? Because this is not just inside the four walls of Betaworks. This is your sort of full experience going through this process in and out of the office, right?
Yeah. My roommates have been wonderful, wonderful sports about it. At the end of the second episode, you hear from both my roommates in a very great way. They've both been very, very, very great sports and very patient with me, especially. I do a lot of recording at home because the Betaworks office is loud and echoey, and they've been really, really great and patient roommates as I'm like, all right, guys, can you be quiet for just 10 minutes while I record this piece?
Like you asked them before we hopped on this evening, right?
Actually, they are both out tonight.
How convenient.
So, yeah. But yeah, it's been, and I think like as any journalist or, you just have to like get over it. But in the beginning, be like, oh, I don't want to be awkward and pull out the microphone, or, it's weird. You kind of have to get over that hump. But I just definitely feel more comfortable brandishing the microphone wherever I go.
So you mentioned all the different pieces that come together, and you mentioned one, I alluded to one earlier, and there's a second one I want to talk about. But the artwork, man, it's awesome. There's very rare that I stare at my phone with a new show I subscribe to and like literally look at like every corner of album art to kind of figure out how this all fits in. Tell us a little bit about that artwork.
Yeah. So the other cool thing about Betaworks, because a lot of companies are very small teams, they don't have the resources to hire a graphic designer. They don't have that. They're not able to do that. So we have this guy, Dom, who's really talented. And he used to work for Tumblr. And so he kind of does art. He does a lot of the design for a lot of the companies. And that's a really, really cool thing about Betaworks too. So it was me, Dom, and James, and we sat down, and James and I were kind of throwing out some ideas, like being an intern is about like not having a lot of money, and, we want something that like pops. And I think that also the intern artwork is definitely in the Betaworks style. I'm not an artist, so I feel like I'm not using the right terminology, but like if you know Betaworks products and you know the kind of brand and the aesthetic of Betaworks, the intern feels familiar. It fits in with the Betaworks aesthetic and family. So James and I remember I was like, there has to be a bicycle and like a bridge, because that's what I do every day. And there should be beer and this and that. And we were kind of just brainstorming ideas. And then Dom, a few days later, came back to us with this really, really beautiful, beautiful artwork. And I mean, you asked about feedback, and people, that's something I've heard again and again, like, wow,
Oh,
that
yeah.
the artwork just totally stands out, really grabs you, and it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's I've really thought about doing an episode one time just for fun, and you know, come to think about it, I probably should have done this when I missed an episode, but create like a top 5 list of my favorite podcast artwork, and the intern would have to be on that list somewhere because I've just really really dug it, and I think it's great work. So compliments for sure to the artists on that one.
Yeah.
The other one I wanted to talk about, and it makes its way in the handful of episodes that are out so far, and I have a feeling this is going to be a big deal going forward, is it looks like you're also putting a lot of emphasis into the music that you're using.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that decision-making process like? Because, like, for my show, I've got no music, pretty much. Very little intro and outro, and that's it. And a lot of podcasts sort of don't even pay too much mind to that. But you have, and obviously The Heart does, and several other great shows. But what was that process like in deciding to make music sort of a big deal?
Yeah, so there's this company at Betaworks called Blend, and it's a like music sharing platform. So artists can come on and share their music, and a lot of what happens is like one artist will share a stem or a piece of a song, and then 20 different artists will take that and use it and tweak it into what they're doing. So when I first started at Betaworks, James gave me this album, and I reference it at the end of the first episode, but the album is called Assignments. And Assignments was from this music making course, and Blend collaborated. I forget who they collaborated with, but there was this music making course, and Blend hosted all the music. And so the music that you hear in the first episode is from a class. These are just like kind of, you know, people who were learning to use this new music making software, and like this is what they produced. And Blend hosted that music. And I mean, the music's awesome. And, you know, Blend connected me with this guy, Johnny Cosmic, who did one of the songs in the first episode. And then I actually used him again in the second episode. And, you know, it wasn't intentional. Like I never said, like, let's make music a big part of this, but it just seemed natural. And I had all this great music right at my fingertips. And I'd love to make an episode devoted to music. And Blend actually recently merged with this company called Rolly, which is really cool. They have this keyboard. I should look it up. It's called the Seaboard, and it's like a piano, but you can, instead of just like hitting a note on a piano, you imagine like hitting the white key on a piano, moving your finger up the keys, and then suddenly an entirely new note appears. So I think I want to do something more with them about like exploring music and how do you pick music for a podcast, and music sharing. And there's a lot to explore there. Yeah.
That definitely sounds like a whole episode there as well.
Yeah.
I love what you've put in so far, for sure. And the so far, folks, and this is why I was really happy to introduce all of you to Allison, because we're only about 3 weeks in at this point. Your preview I was just looking at came out on December 14th. First episode the next day, and the second on December 23rd. So, folks, get on the bandwagon now, and it's easy to catch up. These are not super long episodes, and then stay subscribed to this, because I have a feeling there's going to be some really interesting things coming your way. What's the reception been like from listeners so far, Allison?
Reception has been great. There's now more downloads than people that are my friends and family. So
yes, that's always a great barrier to get across. Yeah. Well, a couple more are going to come over, I promise.
But yeah, our numbers are really good. Downloads are good. And, we were talking about Twitter earlier, and I was saying how I did not use Twitter before I started working at Betaworks, and Twitter's a pretty cool thing.
It's addicting.
And people who I don't know are tweeting at me. People send me messages. I I've gotten, feedback like, hey, wow, like I just found your podcast. I totally relate to this. I'm an intern right now too. Funny story, actually. So I said before, my roommate, her name's Avery, and she comes in at the end of the second episode, and she's from Alabama, so has this sweet, charming Southern accent. She's hilarious. And one of Avery's friends sent her a text message, and it said, Avery, are you on this podcast called The Intern? I got to the end, heard a girl named Avery with a Southern accent talking, and nearly threw my phone across the room.
Oh, that's great. Small world.
Yeah. So, reception has been positive. And I think like anyone who's producing something, especially, and to be honest, like it feels, feedback is not only a judgment of the podcast, but it feels personal, very personal, because like it's about me, and like I'm saying what I think about things, and my perspective and how I'm seeing things. So I'm nervous, and I'm sure like criticisms will come and critiques will come for sure. And I mean, I'm very much a beginner, and I'm sure there will be episodes that aren't as good as others. But I think that's also like kind of part of the process, right? Like it's called The Intern. Like I'm very new at this. So yeah, I'm sure I will be getting lots of feedback in the future.
Well, I think your story and production choices that you've made so far have been excellent. I mean, it's rare that I see a new show for me to stumble across and only be a couple episodes in, and I want to get the host on. That's pretty rare. Usually, I'm looking for a little bit longer back catalog, and I usually go through and listen to the whole thing. But this was like no delay for me, because I have a feeling that this is going to be something that's going to keep growing. And I have a feeling you're going to hear from more strangers, get more involved with Twitter, and have that feedback. And yeah, you'll probably get a negative feedback or two, but I used to tell my wife one time that I heard on I remember what show it was. I'm a big Everybody Loves Raymond fan, and there's a line in one of the episodes. Yeah, one of my favorite shows of all time. One time, Patricia Heaton tells Raymond, says, that one of the kids yelled from going up the stairs, I hate you. And she says, well, now you're a real parent. Welcome to parenthood, or something like that. That you're not a real parent till your kid tells you that they hate you. I don't know if you're a real podcaster until you get a negative review. That kind of sort of breaks it in, and it's just part of the process. And, it'll come, but, don't take it personal.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Even though it's obviously a personal topic and show. But can you tell us, you've said a little bit about some stuff that's coming up in the upcoming episodes, but maybe even longer range, sort of ideally, where would you like to see this show go in the future? I mean, at some point, 6 months from now, you're going to be a resident Betaworks expert, and you will have talked to everybody in the office.
I hope so.
Sort of, where would you like to see this go and grow?
Yeah, that's a hard question, because like I don't know what my life will be like 6 months from now, and so much of what has informed my journey thus far at Betaworks has just been discovery and following a lead that leads to the next thing that leads to the next thing. So I don't know. Kind of like what I compare the intern sometimes to is startup, and that takes us through a season, and then like they make the company, and then the second season was about a different company. So I don't know, maybe it would, the torch would be passed to another intern that Betaworks wants to bring in, or maybe I would go do something entirely new again and document that. I don't know, but there's definitely, a lot of questions that I still have. Like I'd love to do, definitely an episode on Twitter, exploring that, on music. I think the diversity question is so interesting, and it's been talked about again and again. People have made people have written extensively about it, said very smart things about it. But it still feels like a topic that I'd like to tackle. Like Betaworks, it's very diverse in terms, there's a lot of women there, and I feel like pretty welcome as a woman. But there's also, it's pretty much all white.
Right.
So like, what's up with that? And how can I examine this from a personal perspective as someone like, inside the company? Yeah. And, I'd love to find a way to tie what I'm doing at Betaworks with like education or this women's health nonprofit. Like how, what are the connections there? And I don't really know.
Well, I imagine if nothing else, you've learned a heck of a lot about podcast production.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, on those other areas of interest or your charitable work, educational work, and all that other stuff. If you ever find yourself in a situation where one of those groups wanted, needed, or you desired to bring a podcast entity to that,
Right.
Obviously you're well positioned for something like that nowadays.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it's been cool being at Betaworks. What I'm doing is not purely journalistic, right? Like a company hired me to make a podcast about them. But that doesn't, make it any less real or any less genuine, and there's so much cool stuff to be done with the audio that doesn't really fit into any mold that we're seeing right now. So, yeah. And that's, I mean, as I said at the beginning, like Betaworks is very interested in where podcasting is headed and where audio is headed and all the technology behind it. So I feel like I've just, jumped into to trying to learn the business side of things as well. And that's been really cool. So, yeah, I have no idea where I will be 6 months from now, a year from now.
Would you say though that you've caught the audio /podcast bug at this point?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, before I let you go, Allison, please take as much time as you like. Tell everyone where they can find you on your newly active Twitter account, Betaworks, The Intern. Where can folks find all this awesome stuff?
Yeah, great. So the website is theintern.fm. Betaworks.com is the mother company. My personal Twitter handle, don't laugh, it's Albie that was another thing. Like, I feel like everyone at Betaworks, had like their first name and last name. They were like the first people on Twitter.
Well, I think it's funny because you said you didn't really use Twitter, and that was your Twitter handle.
Yeah, well, I like made it in college on a whim, maybe tweeted a little bit. So it's ALB. My name's Allison Behringer, so a nickname of mine is Albie. Tweetin, TWEETIN. And then the Intern, I have a handle for the show as well, and it's at New York Intern. And yeah, we are in the new and noteworthy section of iTunes. And you can probably find it on pretty much all the apps out there.
Awesome. And all those links are going to be in the show notes as well, folks, as always. Folks, I think only once or twice in my previous back catalog have I been able to jump on a show very, very early, and then I've been able to tell you guys later, see, you should have got there when I told you. The one I always like to point to was the night before Serial Episode 1 dropped. I came on here and told you guys to subscribe to Serial, and look what happened. So I'm not saying The Intern's the next Serial, but I am telling you I'm on this one early. Go check out The Intern from Betaworks and Allison Behringer. You will not be disappointed, and stay subscribed and see what's coming up. Allison, thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. Really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Folks, if you've enjoyed this episode, quick rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher is always appreciated. And follow me on Twitter at PodDigest. Let me know what you thought. And I promise I'll be back again next week with a whole new interview and conversation about another show to add to your subscription list. Until then, my name's Dan Lizette with the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com Facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.